Good morning to our European audience, and good afternoon to EJ and Professor Tsai and our participants in Taiwan and across Asia. Welcome to this webinar of the Digital Taiwan Lecture Series organized by the Institute for Security and Development Policy, ISDP's Stockholm Taiwan Center. My name is Yifei Zhu, and I'm a research fellow at ISDP's China Center. I will be moderating today's event. I'm honored to have Yijie Chen and Professor Zhongming Cai sharing their insights with us today from their co-authored issue brief on Taiwanese semiconductor firms' expansion into Europe. The production and application of semiconductors or chips is widely regarded as a backbone of the digital economy of the 21st century. Among major global players, Taiwan plays an exceptionally vital role as it possesses the most advanced manufacturing capacity and is home to some of the world's most valuable semiconductor companies, such as TSMC. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the global chip shortage revealed Europe's vulnerability in this industry's supply chain. So to strengthen its supply chain security, the EU and its member states turned to Taiwan. Among others, the EU and Germany worked diligently to facilitate TSMC's investment in building a wafer fab in Dresden, Germany, while the Czech Republic is striving to establish a semiconductor cluster at home with Taiwanese partners. However, the path ahead is far from smooth for both Taiwan and Europe. What challenges are Taiwanese companies facing? Can TSMC and its suppliers overcome the hurdles ahead? Can Europe strive to balance between profitability and sustainability of its semiconductor manufacturing? During today's webinar, our speakers will address these questions and share their analysis. The first speaker is my colleague, Yijie Chen. She is project manager and junior research fellow at the ISDP's Taiwan Center, as well as a member of our newly established Center for Research and Innovation Security. She holds a bachelor's degree in Arabic studies from Taiwan's National Zhengzhi University and a master's degree in global studies from the Gothenburg University in Sweden. She has a broad interest in East Asian affairs, soft power, and technology. Her research focus includes Taiwan-Europe relations, cross-strait relations, sports diplomacy, and the semiconductor industry. Our second speaker is Professor Zhongming Cai. He is professor in political science at the National Zhengzhi University and jointly appointed professor of the Taipei School of Economics and Political Science of Taiwan's National Tsinghua University. He obtained his PhD in political science from UC Berkeley in 2010. His research includes comparative politics, political economy, and China studies. His articles have appeared in China Quarterly, Asian Survey, Problems of Post-Communism, Taiwanese Political Science Review, and other journals and edited volumes. His current research focuses on state regulation in China's financial sector. The webinar will proceed as follows. Each speaker will deliver a roughly 20-minute presentation, followed by the Q&A session, where our audience can submit their questions through the Q&A chat box. So, without further ado, we extend a warm welcome to the first speaker. Yijie, the floor is yours.
Thank you for Yifei's kind introduction. So I will share the screen now. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
So I believe this issue is important to discuss, not just because most news we see nowadays, they focus so much on Taiwan, Japan, US, but where's Europe in this picture? Because as a region that is generally well developed and has the vision to develop its own chip manufacturing capacity, especially in 2022, European Union introduced the European Chip Act. It is important to assess its current situation, especially Taiwanese semiconductor firms' overseas expansion are still ongoing. And there's also a fab construction in Dresden nowadays, which start in August 2024. So this presentation will touch upon the political and diplomatic factors behind why Taiwanese firms' expansion into Europe and what challenges faced by them, including their suppliers, not just about TSMC. So the overseas expansion of Taiwan's semiconductor firm is highly political issue. Through expanding its silicon shield to like-minded allies, Taiwan's government hope to strengthen its strategic value in the international community. And take the case in the US as the example. TSMC's location in Phoenix is far from ideal, and the subsidies are quite limited compared to how much it plans to invest. And the extremely high production costs, labor conflicts, and the lack of skilled workers in the US have also been quite challenging for TSMC to tackle the issues. And due to US strong political influence over Taiwan and the international community, TSMC has to set up its facility on the US soil, not only to avoid unpredictable policies that imposed by Donald Trump, but also to maintain and strengthen Taiwan's EU's relation, which is one of the most important relations for Taiwan nowadays. And it's also important to highlight that US is still an indispensable arms supplier for Taiwan, and which has to be considered by the government and also all the enterprises in Taiwan. And I think one of the examples to show why this political issue is in March 2025, TSMC further announced $100 billion investment plan in the US. And Taiwan's president Lai Ching-te held a press conference with TSMC CEO Wei Zhejia. And Wei said all overseas expansions are according to the customer needs, while Lai emphasized there is no pressure from the US side. But even that's what they say, but I feel like the conference itself implies that the political factors have impact on the expansion of TSMC. It doesn't mean that TSMC's operation decision is fully affected by the Taiwanese government, but it shows that they have to consider, they have to take into the political consideration into their decision-making process. And after a while, TSMC CEO also met Trump in the White House, and Trump described him as a person that most respected persons in the business world, and is fully aware that his company should make large investment in the United States to avoid tariffs, which can interpret as a political move to tell TSMC, yeah, you should do what I want you to do. In terms of the expansion in Japan, one can say it's way less political compared to the case in the US, since Japan offers a more favorable investment environment supported by its local government. And Japan is also home to many semiconductor manufacturing equipment and material suppliers, which is a well-developed ecosystem and networks that attract Taiwanese firms to expand their operations there without too much challenges. And at the same time, the European Union, or you can say Europe in general, which is a place that has relatively weak political influence on Taiwan, and also lack of local government support, which reduce the urgencies and willingness of Taiwan semiconductor companies to develop operation in Europe. But however, Taiwan's government still want to deepen its relation with like-minded partners through exporting its silicon shield. So the Taiwanese government continues to support exploring opportunities for expansion in Europe. And nowadays they have a very key focus on the Czech Republic. So talking about Czech Republic, we have to talk about the diplomatic push led by both Taiwanese and Czech Republic government. So even though Taiwanese semiconductor firms are relatively reluctant to expand in Europe, with TSMC's investment plan revealed in Dresden in 2023, and the close diplomatic ties between Taiwan and Czech Republic, there are some ongoing development regarding the overseas expansions there, and I think it's expected to see the semiconductor cluster to be set up in Czech Republic if they eventually decided they're gonna expand the supplier side to Europe. So before the European Union introduced the European Chip Act in 2022, Taiwan and Czech Republic has already established close connection regarding technological collaboration, which also includes semiconductor sector in the discussion. And in late 2021, Taiwan's National Development Council led a delegation to Slovakia, Lithuania, and the Czech Republic. In this context, Taiwan's government and several Taiwanese suppliers are eyeing on building the semiconductor cluster in Czech Republic, especially after TSMC announced its investment in Dresden. And the potential semiconductor cluster in Czech Republic is not only related to Czech Republic's lower labor costs and its proximity to Dresden, but also the close tie between Taipei and Prague. And there have been also a lot of high-level visits between Czech and Taiwanese officials, and also includes semiconductor company representatives in the delegation. And there are also several examples here to show that the diplomatic push between Taiwan and Czech Republic government. So in July 2024, the Ministry of Economic Affairs has selected Czech Republic as a location for overseas manufacturing parks alongside with the US and Japan. And it's quite interesting to notice that Dresden in Germany is the place for the ESMC's fab, but Taiwan's government did not choose Germany as the destination for overseas manufacturing. Instead, they choose Czech Republic. And in December 2024, the Ministry of Economic Affairs in Taiwan again announced the opening of the Taiwan Trade Investment Service Center in Czech Republic, which aims to facilitate Taiwanese enterprises' expansion within the European Union. For example, they can help them to settle down easily in Czech Republic, maybe provide legal service there so they can integrate into the local system better. And on the Czech Republic side, in March 2025, Prague also decided that Taiwanese are allowed to work in the country without a work permit and employment card. And just in the last week, on 14th of May, Czech Invest organized Czech Semicon Days with the Czech Taiwanese Semiconductor Supplier Day in order to attract Taiwanese suppliers to set their foot in the country. And so based on the above mentioned development, it is expected to see the semiconductor cluster in relation to ESMC's fab in Dresden will be established in Czech Republic instead of in Germany. And I would also like to briefly talk about the challenging business environment in Germany. But I think many of the points is already well discussed and mentioned by many other people, since the challenge has been seen in the US already. For example, the high production costs in energy, labor, union, materials, and also the lack of support system, for example, the housing or local transportation. But I would like to focus more on the complex decision-making environment, because when Taiwan began developing its semiconductor industry in the 1970s, it was under an authoritarian regime, which allowed the state to make swift decisions and provide significant resources and support to the industry. And between 1970s to 1980s, in the beginning of the developing of Taiwan's semiconductor industry, the industry is highly reliant on state-driven policies. However, in contrast to Germany's complex decision-making environment in the government nowadays, this situation limits German government's capability to support an efficient development in the semiconductor industry, especially this industry requires high cost efficiency to make the best profit out of it. And I think this bureaucratic challenge is a common challenge for most mature democracies, but also maybe more specifically toward European countries that have multi-party system, and also because it's a union on the Europe soil. The unstable auto market and industry in Germany also shadows the future of the ESMC and its supplier. Of course, the growing electronic vehicle market may increase chip market demand in Germany and Europe in general, since your electronic vehicles require more chips. However, the falling profit in German auto industry may make TSMC and its supplier reconsider their investment plans in Europe, since one of ESMC's main products will be automotive chips. And because at the moment, the major European automakers such as VN Group, which owns Volkswagen, Porsche, Skoda, Audi, Seat, and also a company like Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Stellantis, which owns Fiat, also Peugeot, all of them have been suffer from fluctuating demands. And so without knowing what kind of market demand they have in the future, TSMC and also its supplier will be hesitant to make a decision to fully operate in Europe, because if they cannot make enough profit, why should they move to Europe? And talking about the reluctance of TSMC supplier to expand to Europe, the reason highly overlaps with why TSMC is facing a challenge in Germany nowadays. But I think it's important to mention this because a lot of people talking about why TSMC is facing some kind of challenge or why they don't want to move to a certain country or region, but they don't really talk about it's important that the supplier can follow TSMC or other manufacturing companies to a certain destination, because all these companies, they need to work together to have a cost efficiency product. And so the high production costs and on the development semiconductor ecosystem and unstable market demands, it's already been discussed in the last slide and many other people. And the last political influence over Taiwan is one of the reasons that why the company is feel less urgency to move there, because there is no diplomatic or political push behind it. So they don't feel like, first, if they cannot make profits there and there's no one to push them to go there, then why should they go there? And the last point I want to focus more is the targeting mature chips production for automation and electrification in the automotive and industrial sectors. Because targeting mature chips production can be problematic in this case, because mature chip production is so easy to be replaced by other countries or region that can offer a better investment environment. For example, lower energy price, lower labor price, or if they offer more subsidies there, then the company will just move there because it's more cost efficient. And compared to Taiwanese suppliers' clear investment intention and smooth development in Japan, TSMC's supplier in the US are facing challenges that they're gonna face in Germany. So some of the suppliers that they feel like they have to go to US, and several of them form a supply chain alliances to share the resource, potential cost, and risk in overseas expansion in the US. And this company have concerns that the expansion might be too risky in terms of making profit or not. And I think because the similar challenging environment in Europe, the same strategy may be seen in Europe in the future when they decided they're gonna move to Czech Republic, for example, to support the fab in Dresden. And since we're talking about Germany, so circle back to the situation in Germany. Germany has reluctantly promoted TSMC suppliers to set the foot in Germany. Even Germany continues to emphasize that TSMC could create a large job market, which is crucial for German industry and the European Union supply chain resilience. However, Germany is lack of concrete plans to tackle the challenge mentioned in this slide, also last slide. And this suggests that Germany has difficulties in solving challenges posed by the ESMC fab project in Dresden. And it's also hesitant to move closer to Taiwan diplomatically compared to Czech Republic. So far, Germany's passive attitude cannot effectively resolve the hesitation of TSMC's supplier to move to Europe. So in conclusion, I put the case USA, Japan, and European Union here just to give you a broad view of what's the current situation. Because with the aforementioned challenge that TSMC and its supplier have faced in Europe so far, plus the huge expansion of TSMC's project in the US and its joint adventure in Japan, TSMC will focus more on its project in US and Japan instead of Germany and Europe. Especially for TSMC, overseas expansion typically aims to lower production cost and maximize profits, which makes high market demand and abundant subsidy essential in this case. However, less political influence over Taiwan, high production cost, missing suppliers, potential labor conflicts, lack of local support systems, as well as an unstable demand from the German and European automotive industry leave TSMC and its supplier with limited room to be proactive in Germany and Europe. But this issue is actually highly aware by the European Union. So in March 2025, there are a few EU member states urged the European Commission to propose an updated CHIPS Act 2.0 to address the difficulties of attracting meaningful investment from advanced chip makers. And there are also nine member states. They form a semiconductor coalition in order to better collaborate with each other on building up the semiconductor supply chain in Europe. And I think the question for European Union or the country in Europe that want to set up the supply chain here is, without strong political influence over Taiwan compared to US in this case, and without ideal investment environment, what can European Union do to attract more Taiwanese semiconductor firms to come to Europe? Is Europe willing to invest more or sacrifice some things to achieve the goal? Because they can't expect Taiwanese company come to Europe and are willing to lower their profits to counter the challenge of high production costs while risking having unstable future market demand. Because all these companies, one of the goal is still to make profit. And this is the end of my presentation, and I will stop sharing my slides.
Okay, thank you very much, Yijie, for this very timely and informative presentation. Now, I'd like to welcome our second speaker, Professor Tsai. Professor Tsai, the floor is yours.
Sorry. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Yifei. So can you see my PowerPoint slides?
Yes.
Okay. So after Yijie's presentation on TSMC's global expansion in Germany, I would like to present some data and to explore the nature and the logic of TSMC's global expansion, not necessarily in Germany, but also in Japan, US, Arizona, and also China, actually. So this is TSMC's global expansion, the map. Then you can see not only in Arizona, but in the States, in the United States, they also have the fab in Washington, well, which makes larger 0.18 and 0.35 micrometer. So that's larger. In Japan, they have the first fab operation in late 2024, and they are now establishing the second one. And Germany, Dresden one is under construction. And interestingly, TSMC actually have they have the one in Nanjing and the one in Shanghai. But you will see this bigger picture here in Taiwan. They're not only having a lot of fabs, but also still establishing the new ones for the most advanced smaller chips, 2 nanometers in Jiayi and Kaohsiung. So that's a general picture, echoing what EJ just presented, that in reality, global expansion might not be something beneficial to TSMC, because you will see their global expansion is still rather limited. So I will argue that the nature of TSMC's global expansion varies in these countries, but in general, they are all demand-driven, which means it's not TSMC who initiated this global expansion project, but they were invited. But I think here we need to quote unquote, they were invited to invest in these countries. And from Japan, China, Germany, and United States, we found they were adopting different processes. So in China, Germany, Japan, they're actually adopting the mature process to make 22, 28 nanometer and 12, 16 nanometer chips. The capacity in Japan is 55,000 12-inch wafer. In 2027, when the second factory built in Kumamoto, they could produce up to 100,000 wafers in 2027. In Germany, they plan to produce 40,000 12-inch wafers. And also for the ownership, we find it's quite different. In Kumamoto, they have Denso, they have the government subsidies, and they have Sony as a major collaborator. But in Germany, that's another case. And in the United States, that's pretty much like the TSMC is the single investors. They are not in collaboration with others. Although it said that they may work with Intel, but that's another project. And also the government subsidies, the amount of the government subsidies varies from country to country, 6.6 billion from the US. But till this January, TSMC announced that they actually only received 10 billion subsidy, 1 billion subsidies. So this 6.6 billion from the US government, we don't know if the rest of 5.6 billion will come, but at least there was only 1 billion coming to TSMC. And in China, Japan, interestingly, TSMC, they announced this amount. In 2022 and 2023, they received 220 million and 1.5 billion from both countries. They didn't give the breakdown, which like Japan, how much from Japan, how much from China. But obviously, TSMC was receiving the government subsidies in their Nanjing fab in China, and 5 billion euro from Germany. And it's actually the most difficult thing, not about the talent, the engineers, but also the ecosystem. In Japan, they have a quite good supporting system from Denso, from Sony, these important partners. But in the United States, that would be a very challenging issue for TSMC. But recently, one Taiwanese media, they have reported that some upstream, downstream companies are going or are planning to go to Arizona. So that was happening early this year. But German Dresden case, the problem is the ecosystem was planned and designed to set up in Czech, which is not Germany. So that means you have ecosystem in one country, but you have factory in the fab in another country. So far it looks good, but just in case if there's something happen across the border, then that will be very risky. Okay, so this is the scenario that we projected to have by 2030. Then you will see now the interior circle is 2021, exterior circle is 2030. So by 2021, in advanced process capacity, which means smaller than 6 nanometer, Taiwan, most of them TSMC, they produce 71%. Till 2030, 5 years from now, that will decrease to 58 because then you will clearly see that the US will increase from 11% to 22%, which was regarded as the contribution of TSMC Arizona. And China will decrease by 1%, and Japan will increase by 4%. I think that's part of plan, not by Kumamoto JASM, but actually in Japan, they have another company supported by the government to work on this advanced process chips, which is the Rapidus. Korea will down from 12% to 7%. So in general, you will see actually Taiwan still occupies, TSMC still playing a very, very important role in advanced process, even by 2030. So the challenge for TSMC's global expansion, well, as EJ just said, actually all these things that were in Germany apply to everywhere. Rising cost, insufficient talent, which means how can you get enough engineer to work long hours in the fabs? So that's quite difficult. Uncertain subsidies, as I mentioned, the US government, they promised to offer 6.6 billion, but that's 3 years ago. But after 3 years, TSMC only got 1 billion. They have no idea where the rest of 5.6 plus Trump administration actually, they didn't promise any subsidies. They just happily announced that TSMC is come to invest 100 billion, but Trump administration didn't mention any subsidies they plan to provide. So this is very uncertain. And also the unstable demand in the end product market. So as I just mentioned, this global expansion of TSMC actually relies very much on the demands. So that's why I argue it's a demand-driven, where the market is and they need the chips, so that TSMC was invited to invest. But in Japan, in Germany, in the US, overall speaking, for those mature process chips, most of them are used for electronics and especially automobile industries. But when the business in automobile industries declines, so TSMC went, the factories were established, but the demand was decreasing, has been decreasing, so that you may have some overproduction problem. But well, of course, so far that's not the issue. But with the global trend like this, it's really hard to keep a stable domestic market in Europe, in Japan, and United States, which will make TSMC's current investment look very problematic. And there's also a crowd out effect, which means every year TSMC plan to invest 20%, roughly 20% of their profits in capital investment. So with this 20%, as TSMC just announced to invest 100 billion in the US, plus what they have invested. So in total, that will be up to 165 billion. So that means, the pie is just this big, 20% of their annual profit. So if the US gets more, then the Japan, Kumamoto, Germany, Dresden, and China, Nanjing, they may have a smaller piece, because TSMC is not to invest these countries with certain amount. So the cap is 20% of their annual benefits. So no more than 20%, then that will generate some crowd out effect, which means if you invest more here, then less so. So for these countries, US, Japan, Germany, and China, it's zero-sum game to get TSMC investment. Okay. And interestingly, according to TSMC's annual report of 2024, they just announced a few weeks ago. I show the data here. The TSMC in Nanjing, they have, this is NT dollars. They have 25 million profit, NT dollar. But if you see here, TSMC Arizona, JASM, and ESMC, they're all in deficit. Either 556 or 4.3 billion NT dollar. And Arizona case is even worse. But of course, you may say, well, they're still in the construction stage, so that's why they didn't really have a benefit. But even so, you see JASN, they're still in deficit. They still have the 4.3 billion NT dollar. It's roughly $100 million US deficit. So since these are the place where TSMC's global expansion is, then you will see only Nanjing, they are earning money, but not in Japan, the US, Japan, and Dresden. So again, then how about Taiwan? Then if we look into Taiwan's data, our export, the IC section, it occupies 34% of our total amount of export. And last year, it's 165 billion US dollar. And most of them went to China. Here, 51.7% is China and Hong Kong. Second largest exported target is ASEAN. So neither US nor Japan, and of course not Euro. Euro only occupied 1.8 here. United States 4.5. South Korea 8.1. And the most chips we export is mixed signal IC. It accounts for 39.3. So you can tell from this easy data, and I got this from a Ministry of Finance in Taiwan. So our IC industry actually exported the most to China. Well, of course, not as an end product, because China will process, for example, like the chips for making iPhone. TSMC exported chips to China, probably to Foxconn, and Foxconn made them into iPhone and then export to the US. But the data showed us that anyway, TSMC, they're not directly exporting their chips to the US, but most of them went to China, Hong Kong, and ASEAN countries. And how about import? We actually import not as much as we exported, but still we imported 28%. That's increased by 28.9%, and that occupies 23.9% of total amount of our import. And interestingly, we imported the most from South Korea. That's because memory, the Samsung and SK Hynix, they are the top memory producer in the world. So there's a misunderstanding that some people argue that Taiwan is competing with South Korea in semiconductor industries. But according to my interview to some South Korean scholars and diplomats and the managers in the industry, they actually told me that Taiwan and South Korea, we are supplementary with each other because we don't really produce memory, but we produce controllers, which is very important to connect memory to the motherboard. And Samsung, they are importing the controllers from TSMC. And Taiwan, we actually imported a lot memory from South Korea. So these countries, we and South Korea, we are not actually that competitive in the industry. Okay. But in general, you will see our export is not targeting to either Europe or the US, but China and Southeast Asia. And we imported very little, 4.8% from the US, 3.1% from Europe. So Taiwan's IC semiconductor industry is closely connected with China and Southeast Asia. Okay. So my conclusion is TSMC's global expansion, or you say Taiwan's semiconductor industry in general, we are facing increasing political risks while the business benefits are decreasing. So will there be hollowing out affecting Taiwan? Well, not exactly. Some people worry that if TSMC went to Arizona, United States, we are losing the most advanced technology. But not exactly, because as I mentioned, as I show you, by 2030, even we have the TSMC investment in the US, Taiwan still occupies 58, almost 60% in advanced process capacity. So we don't really have the problem with being hollowing out. But the more important thing is we do have some domestic challenges like the shortage of electricity, water, and we have very frequent earthquake, which will make these fabs and assembly packaging factories are in danger. So these are things more domestic than global. And so my last point about silicon chip is, some people argue that, oh, because Taiwan has TSMC, so they should be safe. But on this issue, we actually need to pay attention on 2 points. First is, as a very important producer of chips in the world, especially advanced chips. Actually, for Taiwan, the silicon shoes should be the ideas that we could get more higher commitment from the US to Taiwan securities. Otherwise, silicon chip doesn't really work. And for China, some people argue that because China needs chips, but with the increasing economic sanction imposed from the US, China's reliance on Taiwan's chips is decreasing. And the second thing, and which is more important thing, is for China, Taiwan is the issue of sovereignty. It's not economic issue. So think about this. Will any country leaders in the world trade their sovereignty with economic benefit? No way. Neither China nor US or any countries in the world. So when media reports or some scholars argues that, oh, because of TSMC, so China will be very hesitate to take over Taiwan or to launch the military action. I personally don't really accept, because when it goes to sovereignty, it's at all cost. Plus, the reliance of Taiwan's chips is decreasing. So for China, they never, or at least they focus on, whenever they focus this issue on sovereignty, then that will be very risky on Taiwan. But of course, it's not the urgent and coming soon, but still, the nature of this issue is different from what media or some scholars argues. Okay, so I will just stop here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Tsai, for your very insightful analysis, which is quite different from what we usually hear from the mass media, and which is very interesting. Okay, and now we move to the Q&A session. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and I'll address as many questions as possible in the remaining time. Let me see. Okay, from August, there's a question. August asks, thank you for 2 terrific presentations. They were highly informative. I have a question about the concept of Taiwan's so-called silicon shield. The theory of the silicon shield is broadly that Taiwan's dominance of semiconductor production has enhanced its security, as many countries are dependent on chips from Taiwan. Now that we are seeing increasing expansion of production overseas, will this affect Taiwan's silicon shield? What are your thoughts on this?
So EJ, would like to respond?
Yeah, I think in the sense that if Silicon Shield actually functioned the way that Taiwanese government would like it to function, um, I don't think the increasing expansion of production overseas will have such big effect on Taiwan Silicon Shield because, like Professor Tsai just mentioned, that even in 2030s, that TSMC will only lower their chips export to 58%, and they're still dominant in the global market. So I don't think there will be a problem for Taiwan's government to still advertise its Silicon Shield, especially TSMC's, and its ecosystem is still dominate the whole technology in this field.
Okay, I would say first of all, we have to distinguish the chips into mature process and advanced process. So mature process is the technology that US actually don't put a sanction on China. So that's why you still see TSMC's global expansion in China, Nanjing. So then you will see the map I show. Most TSMC's global expansion are actually producing mature process chips, which is, to be very honest, low-end products. So with this low-end products, TSMC, they're actually happy to earn more money if the target countries, they're providing some subsidies and domestic market. So that's why you see Kumamoto case is successful. Probably Germany, we have no idea, but they're going there to earn money. So as long as the advanced process chips were made in Taiwan, then this so-called Silicon Valley idea will still be over there. Because the shields, the silicon shields, if you're talking about 22 nanometers, 28 nanometers, or even 40 nanometers, they are not the shields, and they're just the products. And people don't really need that for military engineering or for very advanced products. So I would say, according to the data, this global expansion does not really make too much impact on Taiwan's silicon shield. But of course, then another question is, do we really have this silicon shields? That's another issue.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is from, let's say, Nicholas, and he asks, regarding what EU or possibly sub-regional actors can do to strengthen the bilateral relations with Taiwan and EU regarding the tech sector. This especially as the EU is more unpredictable. US is more unpredictable, and China has increased its pressure. So the question is, what can like EU and Taiwan do to strengthen the bilateral relations given the current situation?
I personally think that because of the unpredictable situation in the US, and also the European Union is aware that the European Chip Act 1.0 is now working well. I believe the European Union will try to revise its act to make the project, for instance, in Dresden or their collaboration with Czech Republic better, because the European Union still wants to have this semiconductor supply chain on its soil. But I think the question for the European Union now is where to find its own strategic indispensability, because it already shows that it's very difficult for them to move the whole production line or the whole ecosystem to Europe. So now I think they have the chance to maybe explore more about the bilateral relations in specific technology. For example, ASML, they're super good at the manufacturing equipment for lithographic equipment. And also there's German company called, I don't know how to pronounce it properly, I would try my best, but Zesis, and they are very good at optical systems. And all these manufacturing company, they need this kind of equipment to produce chips. And I think that could be a way for Europe and Taiwan to collaborate more on the tech sectors.
I would say, no, of course, we expect to have some spillover effect from this chip business, but it's not that optimistic because I'm not very optimistic with this because now EU is not getting along with US very well. While you will see China, Xi Jinping visit Europe, he visited Russia, he visited Southeast Asia. So it seems that China is trying to working with the non-US countries. So while EU is not getting along with China, US very well. So that offers China an opportunity to become closer with EU. So which is not good for Taiwan. But even with that, I doubt if EU they will welcome Taiwan on more political issues. So I personally don't think there's too much room to likely have this spillover effect from this chip business. So probably we will see business is business. When it goes to the political field, nothing will really happen or be improved. Plus, China is trying to work with EU more closely.
Okay, thank you. There's another question left from Julia. And Julia asks that one of the critics for the development of Taiwan's semiconductor production abroad is a lack of skilled workforce. Has the Taiwanese government promoted initiatives for attracting international students and training them to compensate that lack?
I don't really know whether the program is initially initiated by the Taiwanese government or it's more like bilateral efforts, but there are programs between Germany and Taiwan that they send the German or maybe also other European students who study in Germany to Taiwan for exchange program to know more about the semiconductor know-how. And between Czech Republic and Taiwan, they also have some collaboration in university between Charles University and National Gent University. So they jointly have a supply chain resilience center. And there might be some other programs, but there are few of them there already. But I don't really know what's the outcome of it. But because when you see the news, of course, it's always very positive, but I don't know what's the outcome of it, especially it took Taiwan 1 to 2 decades to build up the whole industry. Even you have the program nowadays, how long does it take to actually use this type of talent into the industry? I think that's another critical issue. And the issue of lack of talent is, of course, important, but I think it's also important to see it from an even broader view.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I would like to echo what EJ just mentioned. It will be very challenging. So the first thing is our government, they did promote some training programs or some collaboration between Taiwan's higher education with the German, Czech, or other country, even Japan. But the problem is, would these people in the country, would they be willing to work in semiconductor industry? So Kumamoto case in Japan was very successful, but most of the engineers in Kumamoto factory are actually Taiwanese. They're not Japanese. I visited Japan last week and I asked Japanese student, would you like to work in JASM? They said, well, probably not. First is Kumamoto, very, very rural area, far from Tokyo. And the second thing is they have no interest in working in the manufacturing industry. And third thing is they don't have good training program. So for Japanese students, semiconductor industries is not on the top of their list. But you say how about if we provide training program, but you will never be able to move the fab from Kumamoto to Tokyo. If Tokyo, people probably say, okay, Tokyo, that sounds good. But Kumamoto, thank you very much. No, I won't go. So that's the reason why TSMC sent a lot of Taiwanese engineers to Kumamoto. But they couldn't do this because these Taiwanese engineers and their families, they just have no interest in living in Arizona, middle of nowhere, in the desert. So that's why they were very reluctant and they rejected to go to Arizona. So I would say developing a training program is not difficult. So now the Tsinghua University in Taiwan and the Chiao Tung University in Taiwan, they're in collaboration with Kumamoto University to provide training program. But still, even you have training program over there, but if no student wants to re-enroll, or if they have simply no interest in working in this industry, that'll be very tough. And plus the different cultural background, Asian culture, long working hours, and the families are sacrificing, and so that's just difficult. So I would say it's different between what government wants to do and what what companies needs, and also how the society they view this industry.
Okay, thank you very much. Since time is limited, and I just take advantage of being a moderator and ask the final question. That is, what would you recommend what would you see the most urgent issues that the European governments or countries should address, and what would you recommend them to do?
From my side, I would say the European Union has to acknowledge that all these companies, they are demand driven. They are doing this not because Taiwan needs their diplomatic support. Of course, that's a product that apart from the positive side, if Taiwan can have that, of course, that's a very big plus. But these companies, they still consider the demand and whether they can make profit as the priority. And so for Europe, I think it's important for them to really figure out where they can stand out on the supply chain instead of just trying to copy the whole ecosystem, because in reality it's kind of impossible for them, because you get a higher paid in Europe, you get more vacation in Europe, and that's just not sustainable for the whole industry. But Europe have the advantage on manufacturing equipment, for example. So I think maybe they can look into that part and try to find their strategic indispensability that Taiwan or other Asian country who doesn't have that. Because in Asia we do have a lot of cheap labor, to be honest, and that's something Europe cannot replace it in such a short time. And I don't think they are willing to sacrifice that. So they need to find a gap there and how to fill the gap instead of trying to copy the whole system from Asia.
Yeah, I would say actually Germany has some advantages. It's a traditionally the country with large section of manufacturing sector. This is very important and very advanced technology. But right now there are more like social issues that German government needs to deal with. So probably for TSMC, the best thing to attract them or to keep them over there is to customize a program for them, not just about the subsidies, but the stable demand, local market, plus a training program developed, not with Taiwan, but just based on what German universities they have in tradition. So I think these are all the things. At least I know in Europe, many countries, they would like to invite TSMC to go, but why they make their first footprint in Germany? I think that proves that Germany, at least in Europe for TSMC, that's the best place to go. So, and they went. So I think based on this, there are still a lot of things to do, but as EJ just presented, these issues are very clear. So I think the next step is just figure out how to overcome that. And I don't see any hidden agenda or issues that will prevent TSMC doing more in Germany. So the best way is since everything's already on the table, let's just figure it out how to solve the problem one by one. And eventually, I think they will still have a quite successful story over there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we are almost exactly 11, we have to conclude the Q&A session and wrap up today's webinar. I'd like to extend special thanks to EJ and Professor Tai for their excellent presentations and interactions with the audience. I also want to thank our audience for your active participation. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.